Hey, folks, and welcome to iWizard. So, I'm here with my buddy Sam from iSamwise, and today we're going to be talking about Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. Welcome back, Sam. I'm really happy to have you back on iWizard.
Thanks. I figured since last time I was here, we were talking with Philip. Maybe I'll look like half as stupid since he isn't here this time. So,
Well, he makes us both look stupid, and so we'll have to redeem ourselves today. Actually, I feel like you are the perfect guest to have on for this book, which I didn't actually buy. I actually have it on the Kindle and I have it on audiobook, and I basically just read the whole thing on. Okay, you've got the actual physical copy, but just given your background and your reading tastes and things like that. I thought you'd be the perfect guest to have on, So let's start with this. What did you think of this book? Like, penny for your thoughts, Sam. This is a 1,000-page long book. What did you think about it?
yeah, that's a good question. So, I mean, Pillars of the Earth, and I've said this in a few of my videos, like, it's not just like, oh, it's a famous historical fiction book. Like, it's probably among the more famous books that came out in like the 20th century. Like, very, very popular. Its reputation precedes it. Um, I was a little intimidated going into this, if I'm being totally honest, just because of how big it is. And I was impressed at just how readable it was as a novel for three-fourths of it. I didn't feel the page count. I wasn't checking my watch. I was in for the ride. Near the end, I feel like there's some pacing things that some side tangents that maybe got a little long in the tooth, but we can talk about that. Overall, I really enjoyed it. I don't think it's a book without flaws or without things that you can criticize. I think there's valid issues with it, but I understand why it's so popular. I had a great time reading it. It was very fun. I know a lot of people who read it will often put it in like their top favorite books of all time. I don't know if I'm there. Um, but as a reading experience, very fun. Really enjoyed it.
Oh, glad to hear it. Yeah, I kind of assumed you would. And by the way, for everyone listening, I think what we're going to do is we'll start with kind of the non-spoilery stuff, and then maybe we can, switch over into spoiler territory. And I guess I could announce it when we do that, but I usually forget. Yeah, I actually loved this book. It was gripping. I thought the plot was utterly addictive. The characters felt real and fleshed out and different from one another. And sometimes in fantasy, you don't get that. There's like a Lord of the Rings kind of quality to it where you're not really, they don't feel sometimes like modern novels where you're not like, what does Philip call it? Internalized focalization. You're not really experiencing the world from inside of the character's head. You're kind of viewing them from the outside. And this book felt more like a modern novel, actually. And it's interesting because when you chose this book, and it was you that chose this book, I was thinking, oh, geez. I mean, this has been on my TBR for quite a while, but I'm thinking, is this really going to be my thing? Am I really going to read this 1,000-page long book about building a cathedral in the Middle Ages? Because it's funny, people do pitch this book like, hey, you got to read this, this amazing book. It's about a cathedral being built slowly and with great difficulty over the course of decades. And then I'm like, that sounds totally boring, actually. And they're like, yeah, it sounds boring, but it's not. You have to just check it out. And I feel like that's the worst way to pitch this book. It's kind of like saying Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead is a book about architecture, but there's so much more to it. So check it out. I think there's a better way to describe this book. On the one hand, it reads like the most addicting fantasy novel that you've ever
Mhm.
read. And on the other hand, it also had the kind of feel of a James Michener book, one of
Mhm.
those historic epics. So you're going to learn a lot about England in the High Middle Ages, and you're going to learn about what it took to get a cathedral built during this period. But I would say more so, it's a twisty, turny human drama, almost Downton Abbey, or it's got the sweeping quality of like one of those 19th century novels. I don't know if you felt that way too.
Yeah, it like felt like in novelized form, like one of those medieval movies from like the 80s or 90s, like a Braveheart, like a Henry V, that type of thing, only over 1,000 pages.
Oh, only it goes for a very long time, and you've
Yeah.
got that, coming of age quality. It happens over the span of decades and stuff like that. But I guess I just liked that you get a bunch of complex human characters in this book with motives and desires and goals that are constantly being frustrated and constantly conflicting with the motives of the other characters. And it's all intersecting with history. Some of
Hmm.
it's real, some of it's embellished, but it's all against the backdrop of the anarchy and civil war and famine and the Crusades and the challenging ordeal of building this cathedral at this time. And I like how the stories all intersect and intertwine. And it's the cathedral at the end of the day holding everything together kind of as the
Right,
glue, which is really cool, I think, because that's partly what these cathedrals were for in
right.
some sense. If you really think about their functional purpose, besides being a tribute to God's glory or whatever, and a house of worship, there's a community aspect to it as
Hmm.
well. It being a pillar of the community, as these things were. Now we're in this period of liquid modernity, as Zygmunt Bauman puts it. But um, at the time you had these things that you would build that would last, that were meant to last, and that were like literally a pillar of your community. I don't know, I'm rambling,
Hmm.
but what do you think about that?
Yeah, and I think it's a fitting title of Pillars of the Earth because it almost has this idea of like the earth where earth meets heaven. And you really get that picture in this novel where it's like you get the worst of hell and the holiest of saints in this novel. Um, I mean, there's passages in this book that are and I don't even think I'm being overly puritanical to say that are disgusting, that are nasty to read, that are like this is very uncomfortable. This
Oh,
some characters who
yeah.
are deeply evil, um, but there's also like really holy characters and really beautiful moments, and I think that contrast is part of what keeps the novel interesting too. As you have people from all sorts of different walks of life and worldviews clashing. Because I guess, right, like it's about building a cathedral, but really it's more about here's a half dozen people who all have different goals that all surround building a cathedral. And really it's about them. Like it's not about like there's not a whole lot about like, and we went out and we put another, piece plank on the roof this morning. There's not much of that in the book as much as there is, you know, Tom wants to stop starving, but he needs to be hired by the church. But the church is broke because they're being blocked by this bishop. And so there's a lot more political maneuvering in the book than there is, cathedral building. But I don't know how you pitch that really.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I do want to return to the politics of it because I think there's some ways in which it was done incredibly well. And then I think there are some ways in which the politics were not as complex as they could have been or should have been.
Hmm.
But that said, I don't want my criticisms to ring too loudly because I do think that this book is almost what more genre fiction should be trying to approach, what more genre
Hmm.
fiction should be. This book has something in it for everyone. And I was trying to think just before we were getting on to talk, why is this book so good? Why is this a 1,000 page long book that I couldn't put down? It took me a lot longer to read this than it took you, but I remember I started it on August 4th or August 5th. And so it took me about 3.5 weeks to read this book. And that's not bad for
Hmm.
a 1,000 page book. And I'm reading other books at the same time. And I'm thinking, why am I blasting through this so quickly?
Yeah.
It's not like an R. Scott Baker book where there's nothing gripping you. You know what I mean by that?
Yeah.
You're enjoying yourself, you're learning stuff, you're finding it edifying and meaningful, but it's not gripping in the same way that Pillars of the Earth is. And I think one of the big things that he does is that throughout most of the story, every character has some goal that remains just out of their reach, as I was telling you earlier. Tom the
Hmm.
Builder wants to build a cathedral to completion. He wants to basically build history, and he's
Hmm.
obsessed with it. Ellen wants a good man to love, basically, is what I,
Hmm.
and she loves her son too and wants him to succeed. Philip also wants to build that cathedral, but kind of for a different reason. For him, it's like about establishing a church and his legacy, and most of all, it's about glory to God. Aliena wants, basically, I get the sense she wants safety and happiness at the
Yeah.
beginning, someone she can talk to and connect with and not feel alienated by, like someone who has her intellect. Jack wants Aliena and wants anything that will challenge him intellectually.
Hmm.
Richard wants to fulfill his father's dying wish. William William Hamley it is. He
Hmm.
wants to satisfy his hatred and his lust and his sick desires. And Follett, what he does is that classic authorial what technique of not giving the characters of what they want or dangling it in front of them and really making them work for it throughout the
Yeah.
book. And he has this unique talent for switching almost effortlessly back and forth in between characters without it being jarring and
Right.
moving forward in time too. It could be a week or a month or a year or 2 years, but it never
Yeah.
feels awkward. He
No.
truly does. He is a great talent, Follett is. And we can get to our criticisms and stuff like that later. But I just wanted to say I gave this book 5 out of 5 because of
Mm.
the way it captivated me, sucked me in, and never let me go. And then it's one of those books where 1,000 pages have gone by and somehow you feel it isn't long enough, which is
Mhm.
a weird feeling.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Because even with characters like, William is one of the primary villains in the story, and he's absolutely despicable. There's almost nothing, despite Philip's insistence that this isn't true, there's almost nothing redeeming about William. And yet there's almost at least up to a point, a perverse fascination with him where it's like, I want to see, is he going to be able to sabotage their plans again? How is he going
Yes.
to block them again? And so even with a bad guy, even with somebody who's despicable that you hate and you wish would, like, trip, getting out of bed and break his neck in the morning, you're still excited to see like what happens next with him. And that's, if you've tried any, which we were talking about, like working on writing projects before we went live here, if you've done any writing, you know that that doesn't happen accidentally. All of that takes skill and takes work. And um, Christopher Rocchio talks about how like pacing is subjective to the reader, and I think there's truth to that. But it's funny to me how I've heard a dozen different people talk about Pillars of the Earth, and never have I heard somebody say, uh, "But it was slow." Like it was a long, slow, ponderous book to get through. Consistently, what I hear is Follett is a thriller writer, and it shows in this historical fiction novel that it just moves like a rocket. Um, I
Yeah,
definitely felt that.
I have long been saying that genre fiction writers, especially speculative fiction, science fiction, and fantasy especially, could learn a lot from thriller writers,
Yeah.
from the Jack Carrs and the Michael Crichtons and the John Grishams of the world. Uh, they could learn a lot. You could still
Mhm.
have the detail, the world building, the richness, but these are people who, I mean, the genre is called thriller. These are people who approach their books and they're not worried about being some highbrow writer. They're worried about entertaining the readers and giving them a bang for their buck. And they know
Mhm.
exactly how to do it in terms of the 3 act structure and the plotting. And by the way, just getting back to what I was saying a little bit earlier, what did you actually make of the length of the fact that this is a 1,000 page long book? Did you feel that the length was justified? Did you want it to go on? I know there are sequels, but I know almost nothing about them,
Mhm.
whether or not they're good. But what did you think of that?
Yeah, I think the length would have been a problem if Follett hadn't made it so accessible as a book. It's in a sense he knows what the scale of the book is going to be, and you and I have both. I won't name names, but you and I have both read fantasy books, science fiction books, where the author both writes it very, very long and intentionally makes it very difficult to understand or to get into. And for some people, that's a challenge and they like that. But if you want a book that's going to be a massive bestseller, that's going to be one of the most popular books of the century that it came out in, like Follett really cracks that in a way that a lot of genre fiction just won't ever, because it's more inaccessible. And so I think Well, I'll give somebody you mentioned, um, like R. Scott Baker. A lot of those names are very hard to wrap your mind around and to remember who goes with who, and it takes a split second of thinking to keep everything straight. And with this, even though we don't even though at least many people reading this aren't going to be historians or be familiar with the setting, he does a very good job grounding you. The names of the towns are easy to remember. Our characters are Henry and William and Philip. And when he wants a character to stand out, he gives a name that's just slightly off, which is like Aliena. You know, it's like it's kind of like a name that you're familiar with, but not quite. And so I think the accessibility of how he wrote it is what helps justify the length.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to get through still, and it's still like there's never a moment where you're like, okay, I'm having to fight to work through this text.
Yeah, exactly. And so it is easy to read. It's, as you say, it's super accessible. One of the things that I found, I wasn't sure how to approach this, that I found both one of its strengths and also maybe one of its drawbacks is that the book uses a modern language. It doesn't use
Yeah,
archaic or difficult language or write in dialect. If you read George R. R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire, it feels like older. He actually does write a little bit in dialect.
yeah.
There's almost modern speech in this, and this is set
Mhm.
in like 12th century England. And so I think in some sense that is why it's so accessible, so gripping, so immediately easy to read. I know nobody in the sort of booktube fantasy sci-fi community who couldn't easily just get into this and have a good time with it.
Yeah.
Um, so there are pros and cons of that though, because sometimes when you use a more modern language, you let modern ideas and sensibilities slip in, which is one of the things he does as well. I don't know what you
Mhm.
thought about that.
Well, that's certainly true. Like, in the introduction to the version that I had, Ken Follett sort of wrote a foreword talking about the history and the success of it and thanking people. And he said, it's kind of weird. He said, I'm an atheist. Uh, and it's weird that I wrote a book about building a church and it did so well. And so he kind of talked about how his lack of faith informed some of how he wrote the book. And I think he actually does a pretty good job writing some great characters of faith in the book. But then you have characters like what's the witch's name? Is it Ellen?
Oh
Uh,
yeah, it's Ellen. Yeah.
yeah, like Ellen, like totally reads like a mid 20th century skeptic type character, where it's like, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but she reads very much like a modern character and not like somebody out of the Middle Ages. Which I don't know, for some reason that doesn't really bug me. I'm not really saying that's a flaw, because it didn't ruin my enjoyment of the book. Um, but it definitely isn't like if you want a book that's a pure reflection of what the time and the age is like. Yeah, there's some things that feel very much. And to add to that, there are some things that Follett introduces in the story or uses or plays with that we now know are incorrect assumptions about the Middle Ages. Not a
Yeah.
ton, once again, that it ruined my enjoyment of the book, but there are some things where it's like, oh, yeah, well, that's sort of been the research on that has maybe been updated since then.
Yeah. I agree with you. There there was a lot of that, I think, smuggled into this. Not, I don't even think on purpose. I don't think Ken Follett has an axe to grind or he's driving at anything. That said, it's what comes out when he's trying to tell a good story. uh, Aliena, for example, saying that the monks do a lot of good, but that their attitudes toward things like women and sex are unfortunate, right? I can't see really anyone of this time period saying that. And I've read Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. At least the wife of Bath sounds like a woman of her time period. Yes, she does have a more modern sensibility, but her what scholars have reinterpreted Allison as a proto-feminist. She's not a
Mm-hmm.
proto-feminist. Sh Her concerns and her attitudes arise out of the realities of the High Middle Ages. Um, so yeah, there were Ellen and Aliena and some of the things that they were saying didn't always feel authentic for the time period. I can't
Mm-hmm.
imagine. I found myself thinking, I can't imagine a woman talking this way at this period of, at this point in time. that their words were often very much informed by modern assumptions. And even a character like Ellen, who had such a modern ideology and outlook that I feel like I've met her before.
Right.
And and I think sometimes what reveals it is when monks are being monks and peasants are being peasants and the Middle Ages are being the Middle Ages and they're outraged and shocked and oh my gosh, I can't believe you monks believe this. Oh good sir, I can't believe you said that to me. And it's just it's all they Ellen had this almost Rousseauian ideology
Mm.
that just wasn't part of the popular consciousness at this time. How did you feel about his portrayal of the monks? I both felt it was, as you said, he talks about the fact in the intro that he's an atheist. Why don't I just ask you this before we get just to the monks? What did you think about his portrayal of Christianity, of people of faith?
I guess I'll say this. It's in better faith than a lot of other
Yeah,
books that I've read.
yeah, yeah,
So even if it's not perfect, I'm willing to cut him a little bit of extra slack because I think the character of Philip kind of covers a multitude of sins in the book. Um, I do like that it's not just like one note. You get a range. So some
totally.
people, they are here because this is the scholars of the day. And even if they're not like sold out for God, even if they're not living for Jesus, like this is where the scholarly work happens. So they're there. You've got that with Jack for a while in the book. And then you've got some people like Bishop Walleran, where this is just a politics game for him. This is just about accruing power. This is just about who can I have in my corner. And so I think that uh, broader view, having kind of a wide range of how the church is being used at this time, both as a center of learning and also a political presence, and also some people who actually take what they read in the Bible seriously and are actually trying to, what would you say, be a representation of Christ for the people around him, which you very much get in the character of Philip. Um, I think that range of perspectives helps cover up maybe some of the other issues where in a lesser author I'd be more picky. So overall, like I was pretty happy with the monks. As far as like everyday people and their faith being shown, really like William seems to be the most faithful in terms of like being concerned about his standing with God out of any of the
Yeah.
other characters, which
The
is
status of his soul and will he go to
right.
hell and what will happen if he has to go to hell and making sure that he confesses and repents, even if it's completely transactional. Like just,
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
know what you're saying. Technically speaking, he is, more, almost more faithful than someone like Ellen.
Yeah.
Even though Ellen is like, someone that I would let babysit my kid, and
Right.
I would get a restraining order against William. But yeah, I did like his. You might say that his presentation of the monks and of the church in general, it sometimes felt like it had a note of cynicism,
Hmm.
uh, in there. But I also think he did a good job exploring the human, all too humanness of the monks. He explores the sin of pride very
Hmm.
much throughout the whole book
Yeah.
and how the monks are constantly aware of that, and yet they all essentially remain flawed and prideful to the very end. And some are better than others, obviously, but I just liked the tension that was drawn out in this book between being a good Christian and being super humble and meek and knowing the right way to run a priory and the right way to give faith to God, but kind of not being able to do it because attaining power within the church system
Right.
requires you to actually have pride and not be
Hmm.
meek. And then on the other hand, the injunction from who was it, Cuthbert at the beginning of the book, that a man may just as easily frustrate the will of God through excessive humility as of excessive pride.
Hmm.
And I just thought that that tension was delicious. But again, I liked the tension between uh, the need to be a good Christian and also the need to be sly so that
Right.
being a good Christian, you can have power in the church and make it better. This is a Machiavellian point. Machiavelli
Hmm.
in The Prince talks about how in order to be good, you have to know how not to be good. In
Hmm.
order that a king can't be meek on behalf of his people if he wants to do good for his people.
Hmm.
That for the safety, the security, the justice, and the flourishing of his people, sometimes a ruler has to do bad things, but it's about knowing how to do bad and not losing the underlying principle that makes you do the bad thing. And I know this sounds terrible that I'm saying this, but this is directly what I mean, it's a direct quote, actually. Machiavelli
Right.
says that a leader has to know how not to be good in the service of moral aims. So I thought that was developed so well. Moments where Philip has to, in order to do the right thing for Kingsbridge and for his people, he has to be a cynical political operator.
And actually, it hurts the kingdom of heaven, if you will, in terms of what they're doing when he is naive, when he's
Yeah,
not on his guard. And so, I mean, this is something that even like, I mean, as old as like, Shakespeare's got in some of his plays where you've got like priests where it's like, okay, is it moral to lie if it's for the greater good? So there's, that is sort of an age old question about Jesus says to give to Caesar what's Caesar and to God what's God's. But what do you do when those two like areas start to blend together and aren't quite as
100%.
distinct as maybe you would hope they are?
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree with you. And then, at the same time, I thought sometimes he took it too far, especially after I know, like, I'm supposed to say death of the author or whatever, but when he revealed the fact that he was an atheist, and here he is going to write 1,000 pages about essentially Christian, pious people, many of them pious people. So I do feel like he brought some of those biases into the book, assuming always that, well, almost all of the monks in this book, let's say the majority of the monks, the bishops, the priors in this book are presented as being a bit cynical,
Mm-hmm.
and many of them are corrupt, and many of them are selfish and really political operators,
Mm-hmm.
nakedly Machiavellian, grudge holding, greedy. I'm thinking of Remigius and Wallerin and just many of the people who have sided with those folks. And so many of the monks are these political, greedy social climbers who use God and religion as a way to accrue more power
Mm-hmm.
and more wealth. And I almost felt like what is it Aristotle said? Any virtue carried to its extreme becomes a vice. I think, I think sometimes he pushed it too far, to be honest
Mm-hmm.
with you.
And so what's bizarre is then like, okay, why do I personally like know a number of Christians who still like really laud the book? And why do I like as a person of faith am like still okay with how he handled most of that? And I've been thinking about that. And the example that came to mind is Jordan, do you ever see the movie Kingdom of Heaven?
No,
The Ridley Scott Crusades movie. So
no.
King like Ridley Scott is by no means a Christian, and if anything, kind of comes off a little bit antagonistic towards the church. And in this, but the funny thing is, this Crusades movie is wildly popular with a lot of Christians and Catholics. I know that the indie incense punk author Andrew Gillsmith said that this is his favorite movie. Even though, if anything, in the details of the movie, it is more critical of the church than anything. And I've wondered about why that movie is so popular. And it kind of reminded me of Pillars of the Earth, too, in a similar sense. And the answer that I think it was Andrew Gillsmith that gave this was that it's because of the aesthetics of it, that they get the aesthetics of the religion and what it represents so well that even if the messaging is trying to be more negative or more cynical, the imagery and the aesthetics of it are so spot on that people are still gravitating towards it, that there's still an appeal there. Um, I don't know if that's pure nonsense, but that at least made sense to me. I don't know if you have thoughts on that as far as this book goes.
No, I do. I think that's right. I think that's like exactly spot on right. Um, I think part of why people like you and I are so immediately accepting of the atheist Ken Follett's portrayal of religion is, I think, partially the rigor of his mind. It's the part of it's the competence of the storytelling.
Hmm.
Part of it is the fact that he clearly spent years and years researching how does a cathedral get built? What is the layout of a medieval of a city? How, just what was the what did the economy center on? Some of these questions of kingship and stuff like. So part of it is the competence, just the sheer competence of Ken Follett's presentation, the rigor of his mind, the faithfulness in some sense. I know he got some things wrong, but I also think it's his awareness of it's one thing for when you read an atheist who just doesn't you read Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris and you just Christopher Hitchens and you realize that part of it is that they've never attempted to charitably understand religious people
Hmm.
or religion in itself. Sam Harris will just comb through will just comb through the Bible and pick out what he deems to be the most offensive passages according to the standards of 2025's sense of equity and propriety.
Yeah.
And you know, and then he'll read it literally there, and then he'll say, well, if it's beautiful in any way, it's because it's not literal. It's and that kind of thing. So, but I got the sense that Follett has a respect for and a reverence for religion and a kind of understanding of it. And even what things like cathedrals mean for a community and for people,
Yeah.
what it means to be a monk. The cathedral itself is almost a character in the book, and there are lots of. I actually want to pull up the Kindle right here. I want to read you a couple of quotes because I was going to ask you a question about this, but this is perfect. You talked about the aesthetic. Is that what you said?
Hmm.
The aesthetic. I think he gets the Christian or even conservative understanding of beauty and transcendence right. Here's a passage. This is from part two. Tom designed the three levels of the nave wall, arcade gallery and clerestory, strictly in the proportions 3:1:2. The arcade was half the height of the wall, and the gallery was one third of the rest. Proportion was everything in a church. It gave a subliminal feeling of rightness to the whole building. Studying the finished drawing, Tom thought it looked perfectly graceful. But would Philip think so? Tom could see the tiers of arches marching down the length of the church, with their moldings and carvings picked out by an afternoon sun. But would Philip see the same? And then he goes on. Here's another quote, real quick, and then I'll ask you a question here. Philip says, "You want to build this cathedral yourself, don't you?" Tom hesitated. It was well to be candid with Philip. The man had no patience for prevarication. "Yes, father, I want you to appoint me master builder," he said about as calmly as he could. "Why?" Here it is. So Tom had not expected that question. There were so many reasons. Because I've seen it done badly and I know I could do it well, he thought. Because there's nothing more satisfying to a master craftsman than to exercise his skill, except perhaps to make love to a beautiful woman. Because something like this gives meaning to a man's life. Which answer did Philip want? The prior would probably like him to say something pious. Recklessly, he decided to tell the real truth because it will be beautiful. That this idea of beauty as an end in and of itself, the good, the beautiful, and the true. I thought he hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
Yeah, what
that's
did you
right.
think about that? There's just the idea that there's something there's beauty is a substantive good. Christopher often talks about this, about the fact that when you go to the MoMA and you see like Jackson Pollock and you bring a bunch of like high school kids and you show them Jackson Pollock or Duchamp's urinal or the Piss Christ hanging on the wall or whatever. And you actually have to explain to them why
Right. Right.
it is meaningful and why it makes sense. And Christopher was making the point that when you show those same students a romantic landscape painting, when you bring them to see Da Vinci or Monet or Raphael, or when you Jacques Louis David's The Death of Socrates or whatever, you don't have to make any argument. There's no justification that you have to make. It is instantly, utterly beautiful, and everyone knows it, and everyone knows why it's beautiful, and you stand in awe in front of it. And
Right.
I think the author here gets that.
I think that's right. And I think he shows that in some very cool ways throughout the books because so there's this idea in the Bible and in religious belief of the incarnation, which the gospel author John describes as the word, the logos being made flesh and dwelling among us. Now he's specifically referring to Jesus, but there's also a religious idea that after Jesus' death and then resurrection and ascension into heaven, that the incarnation continues in those whom his spirit dwells in. And so you have this idea of the logos is not made into something that is substantive unless you're living it out, you know? And
Hmm.
you see that the church almost being this image of like the hand of God in the middle of this village. And so as William like opposes, the hand of God, the idea of, the church being made flesh, as he opposes that, guess what? Like his life goes to hell in a handbasket really fast. You have him oppose the church, you have him commit some horrible sin, and then he gets news that like a family member has died or something tragic has happened. But then you also see the opposite being true, where I think it's is it Jack? Yeah, that Jack is doing all this carving for the church and making these beautiful statues for it, and that actually ends up being the pathway whereby his dream is fulfilled. Like, I'll keep it spoiler free, but like later on in the book, he's looking for something and he ends up getting the desire of his heart because of this process of the word, the idea being made flesh and being externalized. And so it's almost a metaphor made manifest of art leading you to, and truth and beauty leading you to what he wanted eventually, as sort of like God's guiding hand throughout the book. So, and I don't know if Follett is trying to do that, but it's almost like he's a good enough writer that it comes out anyway throughout the book.
Yeah, and I feel like Follett also understands the way in which architecture can uplift us or can
Mhm.
degrade us. And this is a conversation that we've been having in the popular culture. We've seen a kind of return of this debate of does brutalist architecture does and I'm gonna just make the most embarrassing admission here, and anyone who follows me is gonna learn this about me and then run in the other direction. I really like modernist architecture. I'm sorry, there's something wrong with me. I know there's something like messed up about me. I do like some brutalist architecture. I do like a lot of modernist architecture. The background of my computer screen is Falling Water House. So yes, I have sinned. I am not a perfect person. I do have a an obsession with modern architecture, very much. That said, we have been having this debate over the extent to which architecture either can ennoble us, can lift us up, can dignify a people, or whether it degrades them. And this question of it being the the king or the president or the governor of a state, it being our leader's responsibility to give us beautiful architecture.
Mhm.
And I was thinking too about the I mentioned this before, but the distinction between sort of classical architecture and kind of the architecture that we had in this country, like as you would know, Thomas Jefferson was pretty much responsible for bringing Greco-Roman architecture to America. He was the one to build the University of Virginia and to do
Mhm.
it in using these classical principles. And then on the other hand, this idea of liquid modernity. And I was talking to the writer Carl Truman, who is a deeply devout Christian, and he wrote a book called "The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self." And Truman was talking about this about liquid modernity, and I asked him to give me an example of what that means. He said, liquid modernity, by the way, is the idea that in modern times, especially since World War I, after World War I, you begin to have this sense that that there's nothing to grasp onto, that there's nothing that
Hmm.
lasts, that everything is disposable and discardable. What is it that Bradbury says in Fahrenheit? This is the age of the disposable tissue, is how he
Hmm.
puts it. And that we don't have the example that Truman gave was go to some small town in the United States, whether it's in where you live or whether it's where I live in Massachusetts, and you take a look at the bank, on Main Street. It used to have pillars. It used to have
Right. Yep.
stone steps. It used to be the bank that your grandfather used and that your father used, and it's there as this physical reminder, not only of beauty, but it's literally meant to intimidate you. And again, it's a bank, so it's meant to make you feel like your money is in good hands. It's in a solid vault, and we're not
Hmm.
playing around here.
Yeah.
Um, and and he said, look at banks now. They're made of plastic. They're these pop-up banks. And it's a Citizens Bank, and it's this ugly green plastic, and everything's fake. And the people there are fake too, and they don't care about the institution. And you walk in there, and you feel like you're in some corporate hellscape, and then it's gone the next year, and then there's a Citibank in its place the next year, and then a People's Bank, and so I think tying it back to Pillars of the Earth, I think Follett understands this in a way that's very real. I don't know how you felt about that.
Because it changes your behavior too, right? It changes how you view things. It's not just like, well, it's the most practical, right? So speaking a little bit more on like a religious point with that, like this is a big discussion that will come up from time to time about how churches get designed, especially modern churches, because Protestants are especially known for having churches that are about as beautiful as a bad coffee shop. Um, and it's like, and so what's the result? Then you have people, they show up to church and they're wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and somebody hasn't showered since last week and they didn't comb their hair before coming to church, and the pastor is wearing flip-flops, and there's a general sense of almost disrespect that can come about. And I'm not saying that all of this is laid at the feet of, having an ugly building. I'm not saying that it's all its fault, but it definitely doesn't help. Whereas you go into a cathedral and there's almost a sense of reverence that you have just from the architecture, just from the beauty that you're seeing. And it's like, well, that architecture was done by other people. And it's like, yes, but it puts you in the state of mind of reverence, of thinking of things that are higher than yourself, of thinking of sacrifice. Like you think of how difficult it is to paint a painting or to make a statue, and how many days, months, or years it takes to accomplish something like that. And it already puts you in the mindset of sacrificing for something that is greater or more important than just yourself. And I think you lose that once you start going more towards, like you said, modernist architecture. Boo.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And I'm trying to discipline myself here and not go on a rant about why I like a lot of modern architecture. Um, Going based off of what you said as well, you talked about what is his name, Jack, and Jack's quest for almost his search for truth and his quest to learn about his father and stuff like that. That's another one of the things I liked about this book is this question of fulfilling your father's wishes or avenging him. There's a major difference between the way Ellen raises her son. Maybe we're kind of in the spoiler territory. So if you really haven't read this book and you're actually listening to a long conversation about Pillars of the Earth, and you haven't read the book, maybe now would be the time to tune out. But there is a major difference between the way that Ellen raises her son and her admonition that she doesn't want him to grow up just being someone who lives to avenge his father. And you can think about the fight with Alfred and again his quest to learn about his father versus Robert, Aliena's brother, who is explicitly told by his father that his mission in life is
Yeah.
essentially to avenge him. And so it does raise the question of, is vengeance in some cases a noble virtue? Maybe it is right to live for the sake of honoring your parents after they're gone. And so I think there's a tension there as well. I think good writers draw out these tensions and don't give us the answer necessarily. That in Robert's case, his entire life is bent in that direction, doing his
Yeah.
father's will. And Jack is explicitly told not to live that way. And so I think that remains an open question as to we are told to honor our parents. And so how ought one to live? I don't know how you felt about that as you read the book.
Well, you have a similar dichotomy there with William too, in honoring what his parents. Well, I just as an aside, it, the what was it? Is it the it's the Hamley family? They reminded me of something out of like a Dickens novel or out of like the Thénardiers from Les Mis. Like
Yes.
one of my tropes that I just love is like an evil family that just like the mom is evil, the dad is evil, the kids are evil, they're all scheming. So like I said before, there's almost a to a point. Yeah, William, to a point. There's almost a perverse like fascination of like watching his own ego get the best of him in the book. But yeah, you have that contrast of carrying on your family's legacy with him as well as a character. That's funny. I never noticed that contrast between Jack and Robert, but you're right. Like it is there, and there's almost a there's some of that happens with Alfred too, right? Like he wants to be the one who
100%.
builds the cathedral, and he wants to be the one who picks up what Tom was doing. But he doesn't have the skill for it. He doesn't have the heart for it. Um, in a certain like neither Jack or Alfred are particularly pious, but in a certain sense, like Jack still understands the mission of it even better than Alfred does. Um, when that creates oh man I almost hate Alfred more than I do William in the book, like
I
just
know.
what
I
an
know.
awful
I
character.
know. He's a terrible character. And again, I'm one of these people who I think that your ability to draw up a compelling bad guy that makes me hate the bad guy, that's a real talent. And so at the end of reading a book, well, someone will ask me, who is your favorite character? I will often say if there was a good bad guy, I will say the bad guy, and they'll go, "Oh, who are you? This is terrible. Like, how could you think that?" And I say, "No, he was a good bad guy. There needs to be an antagonist, and he was a really good antagonist. And in some sense, he was more compelling than the hero in whatever story you're reading." I agree. Alfred is frustrating because he's such a dud as a person in some sense. And that can be even more frustrating than a competent, evil, scheming bad guy. You're so right about the Hamley family. And it almost approaches going a little bit over the top with, I don't know that bad guys actually scheme that way, where they're like, how can we ruin this person? And, that doesn't fit into my larger plan of taking over the world, like, Dr. Evil or something like
Yeah,
that. That's kind of like the Hamleys almost rose to that level of caricature-ish bad guys. In fact, as I was reading this, I was thinking, George R. R. Martin might have done a better job with the Lannisters
mm,
than Follett does with the Hamleys in the sense that the Hamleys just are almost cartoonish at a certain
yeah.
level. But no, William is a good bad guy. And Alfred is just again, he's someone who has no virtue. Again, because you could break down the characters in terms of the people who actually work on the cathedral, and you could say, okay, why is Tom so good and why do we like Tom so much? Well, Tom is obsessed with something. He's
Hmm.
an
Hmm.
idiot savant. He's someone who he's just singularly devoted to building a cathedral and he tries his best. We know he's deep down, he's a good person. He's doing his best, but one of his flaws is actually that he is got tunnel vision about he cares, he just loves competency and being a good craftsman and seeing a job well done at the end of the day. I think his competence is refreshing. We're living in our society through a crisis of competence. No one does
Hmm.
anything right, nothing works. And that was very satisfying. And then there is Jack, who is not the same as Tom. He loves building now that he's learned about it, but he could love anything that presents to his mind as a challenge.
Hmm.
So Jack is someone who's a genius. He's just a genius, obviously, and he could do anything. He could build a mill to impress a girl on the spot and make it work to hammer these. He is just once he becomes a monk, he is now um, edified, and he is invigorated by reading philosophy and
Hmm.
theology and stuff like that. So he's a genius. Tom is solely dedicated to one thing, which is another charming quality. Alfred is just he's like, well, he's like a lot of the students well, I don't want to say anything about that. Alfred is just he wants to succeed, but he wants to take the easy way out. He's a semi-competent builder, but nothing special. He doesn't have the virtues. He doesn't have the virtues. He doesn't have the grit. He's just kind of a dud. And I
Hmm.
find him for that reason to maybe be the most frustrating character uh, in the whole book. There's a line from Elie Wiesel's Night, where Shlomo, who is Ellie's father, says uh, Hitler may be the most dependable person in our lives right now, meaning he always keeps his promises. Now, we all know that Hitler's evil, but as a bad guy, some of the bad guys in this, so William is a terrible, horrible, no good, bad man. But if you wrong him, you can count on him
Yeah,
like clockwork to come around and redress that wrong.
yeah,
You can count on him to be what he fundamentally is. He is not looking for a shortcut.
yeah.
He will work hard and fight bravely to be an evil, dastardly piece of crap.
Right, like
And
there's this battle scene where he looks over and he sees like Richard fighting well, and he's like, "Oh, I can't be one up by him. What would the king think of me?" And so
that's
like
right.
he's like seconds away from like possibly dying by like a stray arrow, but he's like worried about how he's gonna look in the eyes of the king, so he must fight all the more boldly. And I messaged a friend of mine who's a fan of this book. I said, dude, like William's awful, but he's also like kind of funny sometimes just because of how much he's like concerned about his own self-image and his own ego. It reminded me of like Joe Abercrombie writes characters like that all the time where they're very concerned about like how they appear to other people and that's
Oh
all
yeah.
they think about. And it doesn't make William likable. To be honest, I think William, you mentioned the Hamleys being over the top. I do think William as a character is a bit overwritten by the end, where it's like, and he rapes another person. It's like, okay, like I get it. He's evil, and we need to have every woman in the book know it, or every character in the book know it. But
Just on your just quick point on that is he's such a freakishly gratuitous evil guy that we learn that the only way he can get an erection is basically when he's raping someone.
right,
It's like he even thinks in his head at one point. I don't remember exactly what the line was, but there was a plump maiden that he was thinking of betting, and he was like, I'll hold her down and brutalize her, and then I'll think of Alieno while I'm doing it, and so that way my parts down there will work. And
right.
I'm just like, um, does any evil bad guy think that way? I don't know. It was just like he's just so
It's a
over the
bit much.
top. I know, I
Yeah.
know. And but again, I suppose all of that is how deep we get into the characters' psyches is part of why, as cringy as it could be at times, is part of why I like this book. Speaking of characters, Sam, I'm wondering who you resonated toward, what your favorite characters were.
It's probably like Philip, in either Philip or Aliena. I think Aliena is remarkable for her like almost right off the bat, like just she gets screwed over by the plot of this book, she starts the book having to break up with William, and William never forgives her for it, and then her family gets destitute, and then she gets assaulted by William, and then she loses everything, and then Richard turns out to be awful to her, and in the face of it she refuses to get bitter or resentful to the people around her and refuses to stop being kind to those who are even worse off than she is. And so I think that makes her immediately likable. But then also Philip, who's also kind of like Tom in some ways, a bit single-minded on like what he's doing. Um, and his nobility, his kindness for people around him. Like I said at the beginning, you get such a dark image of how hellish some of these characters are that it makes the holy characters, if you will, just that much more remarkable and attractive as characters, where it's like, oh yeah, like when there's a scene where Philip like confronts William and tells him off. That
I
was the
love
most
that fire and
cathartic.
fury.
Right. I was like, I think I was even like off in somebody's woods working at a job site. And when that happened, I was like, yes, let's go. Like, I've been waiting for this for 600 freaking pages, you know?
You are going to hell.
That's right. So, yeah, I liked Phil a lot. I think he's the closest you get to a through line through this book. So,
Who did you see yourself in? I'm wondering.
oh gosh.
Like,
Um,
like who, as you are reading this book, who did you identify with most?
I don't know. I think Jack sometimes I related to a lot. Um, a because there's a certain sense of both like a love and respect for the faith and for the church, and then also sometimes frustration with it and
Yeah.
feeling like, but here's what I want, and then having to wrestle between those two things. And so some of that, I mean, I don't know, maybe that's too personal for booktube, but
No,
some of those things I think I resonated with. And sort of a wrestling with how do you reconcile a sense of faith and also a sense of um like personal drive or personal desire. And some of that's, I think Jack's the character who deals with that a lot. Because Philip almost is like almost doesn't think of anything else other than his church or his parish. Like Follett even says at the beginning, like to point on one issue, he's like, I basically figured that like all monks at this time would have a lot of like sex drive issues. And I basically decided to write Philip with none of it, just to not even think about it.
I know.
And
Isn't that interesting?
I don't think that's unrealistic, to be perfectly honest. I think all of us have met people who are, even if they're not religious, who are perfectly content being like single minded in their job or in their community or with their family. Um, and I think there's probably a lot of monks who are like that. So I did not find Philip's single mindedness to be unrealistic necessarily. Um, I don't know. I've kind of lost the plot of that thought. Jordan, what about you? What did you like? Did you have a
Yeah, I'm
favorite
kind of
character
with
or
you.
one you related with the most?
I have similar thoughts. I related with Philip in the sense of I think I try to do the right thing and I try to care for the people around me, but I don't know that I always succeed. I know I don't, and I often fall short. So, but I think I have good intentions, if I may say so myself. I think everyone thinks they have good intentions, but
Yeah,
I try to be really thoughtful about that, and I think that he does too. I'm also a little bit of a political person. I follow
right.
politics
Yeah,
pretty closely. I do sometimes see the world in terms of I see myself as someone who has principles, but who understands that politics isn't just about being able to 100% stay true to your principles, knowing that it's a more complicated game than that, realpolitik, that in order to preserve the largest remainder of your principles, you do actually have to, there's a give and take there and stuff like that. Um, and that sort of thing. So I identified with him in that way. I'm a generous person as well. He's a generous person. People have criticized me for this, that I'll pay for friends when we go out to eat, and I see that in Philip too. Yeah, we'll just take a baby
yeah,
into the church and raise him as our own, even if it's impractical and be really difficult. And then as you said, Jack, I see myself in Jack a little bit. I think for with Jack, it is that I like to have something to work on. I like to have projects to work on. I think one of the defining characteristics of Jack is that he needs to have something to occupy his mind, a problem to solve, something to develop himself with. I like to learn how to do things and get better at them. In fact, I have too many hobbies, so much so that I don't have time to do any of them. Um, and so I identified with him there as being someone who wants to be useful and like spend my time learning how to what techne is the term that the ancient Greeks would have used. Um, but what about Tom? You and I had an interesting voice chat
yeah,
conversation about Tom, and one of the points you brought up was that you feel that sometimes Tom gets an unfair shake of things. That there are readers who, if to the extent that they do put down the book, it's because Tom in the beginning is a shaky character.
I did a just a brief YouTube short just saying, hey, here's what I've been reading recently, guys, and I've been liking it. Here's how far I am. And I got a comment. Um, and like the person was nice enough, but they were like, oh, like the worst character, the most despicable character I've ever read is Tom the Builder. And the beginning of that book just hated it. I'm like, worse than William? Worse than
That
Alfred? Really?
sounds
Tom?
like someone who read
Like,
the first fifth of the book.
I'm not gonna say that Tom's holy or perfect. Like he's pretty stupid sometimes, but like the worst you've ever read? Okay, like I mean, I don't know what people have and haven't read, but I don't know. He makes some bad decisions early on in the book, but man, if that's the common consensus, I think people might be a little hard on him.
What's the worst thing that he does? So it seems to me that the worst thing that he does is the baby,
Yeah.
leaving the baby to die. Okay, so that's probably the worst. That is the worst thing that he does. Then we could make a hierarchy, and we could say the next worst thing that he does is, let's see, maybe he gets over the death of his wife too quickly,
Hmm.
and I think anyone with a heart would say he was unfaithful to her in the sense that her body was barely cold, and he's over there sleeping with Ellen and having a passionate roll in the hay with Ellen.
Yeah.
Then maybe his next worst thing that he did is that he has a kind of a blind spot when it comes to Alfred.
Oh my gosh.
And
Oh, it's so frustrating.
Alfred is just, a jerk half the time. And Tom's like, well, that's my son. And the thing about boys is that they go through a period like this, and he's testing the limits of his physical strength and he's being a boy. He's getting that energy out, and I'm literally starving him to death as we're walking through the woods here, and he's being a man helping me fight off these bad guys who are trying to rob us in the woods. And so what if he's a little mean to his siblings and stuff like that? And I get where he's coming from, and I think even Ellen is like, that's the thing that frustrates her most about Tom. But at the same time, you don't want to be with someone who doesn't love their kid. I
Yeah,
remember
yeah.
Tom yelling at her and saying, I am not ever going to kick my son out of my house. And on the one hand, you're like, okay, well, you're creating a monster given what you're doing. And then part of you wants to be like, okay, no, that's actually really sweet and charming because a father should love his son like that. So it's the tension. It's all very frustrating, but it's all satisfying too.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, because there's a lot of right, like there's a lot of nobility to the character of Tom, and it is a push and pull between like a sense of cowardice, but also trying to do the right thing and feeling incapable of doing it. Um, yeah, no,
Yeah, and we were talking about this too about I think one of the things that you can add to this discussion is I think anyone who is judging Tom too harshly for situations like the baby, um, just remember that this is the 12th century.
yeah,
This is a really, really, really long time ago. And, you know, in this book, we get a sense of how hard life was. I'm not someone who
mhm,
calls these the dark ages or anything like that, and I understand that we have a new understanding of what the Middle Ages were actually like.
yeah,
But I will say that if you're judging Tom too harshly, you might want to reflect on the fact that maybe you see yourself as a good person because it's easy for you to be a good person.
mhm,
It's almost cliche at this point, but you'll often hear philosophers say, well, um, you're able to be a good person because you're not starving. If
mhm.
you're living in the slums of Mumbai or whatever, it's pretty easy, and you're starving. It's pretty easy to be a bad person.
Right, right,
And so to judge Tom too harshly in a world where there's no baby formula, where all your other kids who are living and who are who will be okay if you just leave this baby there, let's just admit he's performing at least some kind of utilitarian calculus. Is it bad? Yes, it's bad. But again, I don't know if you remember this line, but there's a line where he talks about the fact that people during this time would spend a third of the day walking to the market, and then they would spend a third of the day at the market, and then they would spend a third of their day walking back home from the market. And
Hmm.
then, okay, it's Sunday. They spend all Sunday helping Philip build his church and working in the backbreaking sun. And then they spend all their next week being a peasant again. That's life.
Hmm.
And so to judge Tom too harshly when you're sitting in your air-conditioned room with your iPhone and your Starbucks and your MacBook Pro and your bougie life, I just think it's just immature.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely for sure. There's a I don't know. I was listening to Janny Wirtz talk about a different book, The Heaven Tree by Edith Parketer, which is a similar novel to Pillars of the Earth that sort of is but it came a few years before, and she was contrasting the two. And she seemed to think that Pillars of the Earth focused a little bit too much on how miserable life was in the Middle Ages. And I'll let her speak to it. If you guys want to watch it, Jake from Nerd Level Rising hosted the discussion. So I'm not a historian. I can't speak to that one way or another. I'm not an expert, but you get a good sense of just how difficult life is at this time, that you can't just go to the Quick Trip, or sorry, that's a Midwestern gas station. You can't just go to the Super America and buy a sandwich and feed your kid a what, like a corn dog because they're complaining about being
Right.
hungry, on the road trip. That like actually everything that you get in life, you have to get by the sweat of your brow and by like, the dirt under your fingernails. And you even see that with like the building of the church, right? Of like, all right, so we'll just go and buy materials. It's like, no, like the stone has to be mined, and we need to have access to a mine that we have like permission to like get the material out of, or the quarry. We need to go cut down trees, and we need permission to get into the forest. And so there's a sense of, it almost reminded me of, if you ever read like Name of the Wind, there's this obsession over
Yeah.
money in that book, and like making every penny count because money like flees out of your pocket so quickly. There's almost a sense of that, only on a church-wide scale in this book. um which I like that. I like that attention to detail.
Oh yeah, your
But
entire wealth could just be someone burns down your house and
yeah.
all of your wealth is gone because it's all bound up in this wool
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you're selling. I actually don't think I would go the other way, much as I respect the opinion of someone like Jenny Wirtz, really I do. I would go a little bit the other way on that. I don't think I think he made life seem a little smoother than it could have possibly been in those times. The just the sense that, oh, let's go. We're going to march down there and we're going to we're just going to go to the quarry and get some stone. And as an author, he's able to be like, okay, 9 hours later, they've gotten all the stone that they need, and now they're going to march back for. And these people shower like once a year, and so just the sense of being outside and there being flies buzzing around you at all times, and just the sense he does get the fact right that you can just have your entire village burned down and there's no justice.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Who
just
do you
like
appeal to? Like, go
imagine whatever
complain to the
city you
sheriff?
live
He's
in.
bought out too.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine, I live in a city called Lowell, Massachusetts. Imagine my entire city gets burned down, no one does anything about it, and you just have to slowly rebuild your city with nobody giving a crap about you. And so, yeah, that was really interesting. But I do think there were times uh,
Hmm.
when he simplified things.
This
You
is
know,
maybe my biggest like criticism of the book, is that I found at times, for as good as I thought his plotting and his pacing is, at times I found the book to be a little predictable. And like, for some people that's not going to bug them, but we meet Tom and his family at the beginning, and I'm like, let me guess, within 50 pages, pregnant wife is dead. And I'm like, yep, sure enough. And then you have William, and it's like, oh, let me guess, like he doesn't get Eliana, he's gonna rape her later. It's like, oh, yep, like predictably that happens. And so I found some of the beats to be, when I met a character, the first thing that popped into my mind, I wonder if this would happen with them, is exactly what happened. I don't know if that's gonna be a flaw for some people, but I'm at least bring it up as like, there are some beats that are what at least I thought you would expect
yeah, that's a
out of
really
the
good
book.
point. That for some people, it's not going to be a flaw any more than it's a flaw when when you hear someone say, well, yeah, I want the hero to win in the end.
Right,
It's
right.
predictable. You know the whole time the hero is going to win in the end. So it's not a flaw when they indeed do, or a Shakespearean comedy. You know that the book is going to end, as they say, at the altar rails. And so you could see it in one way and say, actually, there is a series of satisfying, there's twists and turns. You can predict most of them, and then the heroes are venerated and they get what they want, and the promises from the beginning of the book were kept, and you could kind of predict it, but it was satisfying when it happened, when William got his finally,
Right.
and stuff like that. So you could say you could be impressed by his craftsmanship and the way that he actually pulls that off and keeps it
Mhm.
interesting. Or you could say, no, I actually want my plots to be really twisty and unpredictable, and I want the author to intentionally go in the opposite direction. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. It's a really good point.
Well, because what you don't want is for it to end with aliens abducting everyone and, like something like, oh, plot
Yeah.
twist, but you didn't see that coming. It's like, well, that's not good either, you know?
They
So,
were dreaming. He was dreaming the entire time.
right, right.
Yeah. So you don't want to just like, go in the other direction in terms of plot for the sake of doing it. But another thing, I guess, like, balancing that against this, I enjoyed. I guess when I got to the end of this book, one of the first thoughts I had was that I wish modern fantasy literature, could be a little more like this. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. This book was really about nothing in some sense. And I want to say that fantasy literature could sometimes have, this book did not have a million action scenes for how long it was. I'm talking about percentages wise. This book wasn't all action. In
Mhm.
fact, at the end of the day, there was not a ton of action. It was really, really well balanced and sprinkled in there. Um, so I just, I almost feel like you could do what Follett is doing. Why not do this with fantasy? Why not just do a long, um, again, as I said earlier, the way this read was a little bit like Downton Abbey or something like this.
Mhm.
Why can't
Mhm.
you have more sagas and fewer, I guess, epics in fantasy? Meaning, good stories can simply be about the dramas and the vicissitudes of ordinary people's lives.
Right.
And you can have a fantasy novel be about the attempt to build a cathedral over the course of 1,000 pages. Why don't we see that? Why, if it's a 1,000 page fantasy novel, it's going to be uh, essentially the farm boy on the Shire who, all the archetypal elements there, the crossing of the threshold, the threshold guardian, slaying the dragon, all of this. You could do fantasy like this.
Mhm.
And so that was one of the thoughts that I had, is that I almost wish fantasy novelists would be more inspired by a book like this.
I think it's maybe it's role playing games because this would make one boring role playing game, and a lot of fantasy novels are heavily inspired by that. I don't know. I'm just kind of that's an interesting question. I don't know why that would be because it's not just that people copy Tolkien and he does the quest and there's hero's journey stuff that people are pulling on. Like it's not just that. Um, so I wonder why that is
I
because you're
mean, they're
right. Like
home.
it's
You see what
yeah.
I mean? They're home. You could invert this and say, actually, Jordan, this is an epic. And, throwing the ring into the volcano and bringing fertility back to the ordered homeland, that if you really think about this, the cathedral is the journey and they reach the destination near the end. And no, this is different than fantasy. They stay put a lot of the times.
Yeah.
You get to see them at home, life in the monastery, life at Kingsbridge, life in Shiring, that kind of thing. It's not an it's not a great epic quest to slay the dragon who's guarding the treasure and save the princess. It is not that.
Yeah.
So, I don't
And
know.
when people do go off and travel, like it's some of the more like boring parts of the book. It's like, can we get back to Kingsbridge,
Yeah,
please? Like,
exactly. That's a really good point. Yeah. Okay. So let us kind of wrap things up here pretty soon. Land the plane, as they say. Um, how many stars would you give this?
I mean, I don't know. For me, it's like it's a solid like 4.5 stars. Like I really enjoyed it. I don't think it's a perfect novel. I actually think how dark the novel gets at times will be a barrier for some people.
Yeah.
Some people are just gonna bounce off of it because some of the characters are really, really nasty people, and I think that's going to I say upset some readers, but to be perfectly frank, like it upset me. Like it's not fun to read. Um, so like on a quality level, like I have nothing but praise for Follett's skill as an author. Like I was very impressed. I know the other Kingsbridge novels are set like 100 years apart from each other, and I've heard that well they're not quite as good as Pillars, but they're really great still. So I'm at least interested in picking some of those up sometime. You know, maybe like one a year could be like a fun idea. I don't know, but like I'm at least interested in reading more of Follett's books. Um, Even if there are parts of this book that aren't entertaining or aren't fun to read, I was really impressed by his skill. When you see, or at least for me, when I see, and maybe it's because fantasy has broken me, when I see 1,200 pages, I assume that there's going to be parts that are going to be a slog to get through, or that are going to be like figuring out all these names and like, bullshit history and stuff like that. And just the ease of entry of like chapter one and we go, and it's just we don't stop moving forward or making plot progression with one character or another. And as soon
No
as one
slog.
character arc starts to, okay, we're getting a little long in the tooth here, then we switch to another character
No
and follow
slog.
them. I was very impressed by how he could hold my attention for that. So
Yeah, no slog. It's very interesting, Sam, that you gave Anubis Gates a 5 out of 5, but that you gave this one a 4 or a 4.5.
it is
No, I
interesting.
won't analyze your motives again. That was very unfair of me, and I will never do that again. I do find it interesting though. I love how people are passive aggressive and they say it's interesting that. No, I get you. I get you. Well, it's you just answered this, but I guess I was going to ask you what your absolute favorite part of this book was. What was the best thing about it? But you probably just answered it there, which was how big of a page turner it
Hmm.
was, how accessible, how the barrier to entry was so low, but it was still so gratifying. I guess is that it? Was that your favorite thing about the book? Was it the characters?
I'd say probably so. It inspired me to be like, oh, I'd never read Shogun, and that's like a million pages too.
Hmm.
Maybe I should go read Shogun now. So
Yes. Yeah, people were not lying about how gripping and how entertaining this book was, and how worth the read it was in some sense. But okay, let's. I guess unless there's anything you want to add, we could wrap it up there.
no, I think we've said it all. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for reading this with me, Jordan.
Of course, what's the sequel to this? I forget what it is.
Oh goodness, is World Without End the next one?
Oh, World Without End. Do you know if that's any good? I'm not going to go straight to it or anything like that, but I'm just wondering if that's does that have a reputation for being good?
I think Mike read the next one, and Jonathan Cohen I know has read the next one, and both of them said they thought they were good. So, but
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, I was wondering if it's seen as being the same caliber or not. But all right, thanks Sam so much for coming on,
Yeah,
and we'll have to pick at some point. We'll have to pick another book to dissect together. And I believe next time it is my choice.
I believe
Um,
so. Yeah.
it might have to be the Kristen Lavransdatter, but we'll see. That's another big chunky book, so
Yeah.
we'll
And
have to
historical
see.
fiction. So,
Yeah, yeah, big time. And it might be. Well, have you read Wolf Hall yet?
mm-mm.
Okay. That might be that might be one as well worth visiting. So think about that. Maybe I'll
Yeah.
challenge you to read Hawaii by James Missioner. That's got a lot of Christian stuff in it with the missionaries
Okay.
and all of that. So that could be a possibility as well. All right, man. Again, thanks for doing this, and have a good Friday. Have a good weekend after that. So.
All right.